a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beauty, a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but
Welcome back to Red Lens for our 2022 year-end roundup episode. Red Lens started in May of this year. Since then, I've done 10 episodes so far, interviewing 10 different people, photographers, videographers, and people who document radical movements in history. 10 episodes in seems like a good time to pause and look back, in addition to it being the end of the year. Honestly, I'm a little surprised I got this far doing this podcast, because a lot of podcasts don't last beyond a few episodes, but here we are. And especially since I'm doing this DIY style on no budget. So for this year-end episode, I decided to invite back two of the great guests I've had on this year for a kind of roundtable discussion. And so I'm excited to have two friends and comrades who are also activists and also photographers back on to do this together from a red lens. So welcome back, Luis and Kim.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be back.
So I'm hoping we can look back together at 2022 from our perspective as activists and movement photographers. In case people haven't listened to the other episodes you're on yet, why don't we just start with brief introductions? Let us know who you are, where you live, and what organizing you're involved with. I suppose I should call on one of you. I'm used to only having one guest. All right. Kim, go for it.
Hi, my name is Kim DeFranco. I work with Women Against Military Madness here in St. Paul, Minnesota, Twin Cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities in Minnesota. Been doing photography, seems like practically all my life. Really enjoy it. Really love taking photos of action and some other types of photos, but definitely when we have our demonstrations, it's great to be out with my camera.
And Luis?
Hey, I'm Luis Sifuentes. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm organized with the Centro CSO community service organization, and we organize against police brutality, fight for public education, and fight for immigrant rights, and with the demand of legalization for all. With photography, I started like 3 years ago. Well, it's already been 3 years. Just documenting like social movements here in East LA, Boyle Heights area, and I started exploring like street photography and stuff, and it's been history from there.
Awesome. So I figured we could just start out talking about, actually, before I do that, I have to just give props to Kim for putting St. Paul first in the Twin Cities. You know, everyone knows, they think if they know any city of Minnesota, it's usually Minneapolis. And those of us in St. Paul get a little salty about that. So thank you. St. Paul is the capital city. It's the best city. Well, they're equally good. So I had to note that. So yeah, why don't we start out talking about some of the biggest things that happened this year in the news and in our movements that we're involved with. A lot of the big things that happen in the news are things that provoke protests that we're out at, either organizing or taking photos or both. So I don't know, I was hoping we can have more of an informal conversation, but just start with discussion, jump in whenever you feel like it, and we can talk about different topics. So why don't we start with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the ending of abortion as a right throughout this whole country. What did that look like in LA and in the Twin Cities in terms of protests, and what did you see, and what's it been like since then? Why don't you start, Luis? Yeah, because I know we talked about this some last time you were on. Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about LA.
Yeah, sure. So right when the leak came out with how the Supreme Court was going to rule with Roe versus Wade, there was like an emergency action in downtown with a bunch of like left forces who came out and organized in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. courthouse. It was like a couple hundred people. It was started off with a rally, and then it marched towards what we call Pershing Square. And then around that area, with 30 minutes in, like as people were leaving, there was like some federal police for the courts that came by and started like trying to like speed through people. And because of that, people began like unblocking the intersection kind of thing. And the cops became more provocative and started coming out of their cars with their batons and things like that. And more squad cars came out. Yeah, pretty much like they started instigating a bunch of things. And then the LAPD came in and started shoving people kind of thing. I remember one time the federal police came out with they pretty much trying to smoke us out kind of thing. And he pointed that thing at me when he came out. I was like, oh shit, kind of thing. I kind of flinched too because I thought he was gonna shoot me. But people just spread off because they started like trying to disperse everyone.
So they pointed that at you while you were shooting pictures, like with your camera, obviously.
Yeah, it was like a little camera too, so I don't know. Yeah, and then I witnessed the whole thing about they try to arrest somebody and they tackled this guy down and his face almost landed on a fire hydrant. People were yelling at him like let him go kind of thing. Things were getting thrown at the cops. There were rookie cops and they were like scared out of their mind. They had no idea what they were doing. And eventually the guy they were arresting got de-arrested and they were just like cornered and then they kind of like they pretty much left. But
Wow.
cops in riot gear came out. Let's see. Yeah, just blocked up Pershing Square. People were just like wandered all over the place. There was like a high police presence everywhere. And then I saw people went back to like square one where the courthouse was and LA City Hall. That pretty much that's when I left pretty much. Yeah, there was like all kinds of people there. Some of the signs that people held were pretty funny because there's some where it's like, what was that Supreme Justice lady that recently died? Ruth. It was like
Oh,
Ruth sent me here. I was like, what? Okay, but there are some. Yeah, there's definitely like a correlation with like white feminism and radical feminism between the two,
mhm.
where it was just very obvious just based on the messaging that they brought out with them. But it was another time where it was way more dramatic. I think it was on a Friday or something like that. It was like a another action that happened, and this time people began marching on the freeways kind of thing, and the police were even more bolder and began arresting people, violently shoving people. I think they even shoved like a celebrity that was there too, and that made it big out here. It was like a actor from Fuller House or something like that. I forgot, but
Yeah.
something along those lines. But
Do you get that a lot in LA with actors or famous people coming out to protest sometimes?
honestly, like the actors that are kind of famous nowadays, I don't even know who they are. That just like see it online. It's like, oh, actor of so and so got arrested by the police. I was like, oh wow. And then I kind of saw that and I was like, oh, who would have thought? But yeah, that was even more dramatic. Like everyone was way all over downtown. But yeah, at that point I didn't really like try to go into their free because they were like kettling people, the same tactics that they did during the uprisings. I think those were the main actions. And then there's something with this organization called, it was associated with RevCom, but pretty much they chained themselves to LA City Hall and then they poured red paint all over the thing to resemble like blood or something like that. It was like a dramatic, like theatrical thing. And of course, heavy police presence, like they blocked everything up. The police blocked everything off and tried to get them out and arrested them and kind of thing. They chained themselves to like a giant pillar kind of thing. So it was like, what? All right.
I saw that kind of went viral online, I think, because I saw like some reels of that
Mm.
action. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I got there all late, but I saw like the after effects, like when they were getting arrested.
Wow.
But yeah.
So, Kim, do you want to talk about Minnesota, the protests since Roe versus Wade and the ongoing organizing?
Well, you'll probably have to jump. You'll have to jump in more since the protests happen when I work, since I work on second shift. But I know it's a great response. In the beginning, there's like thousands of people there, but you can give more details, Brad. But I know out of all those protests, we started a new coalition called the Minnesota Abortion Action Coalition. And what we were planning on doing is to kind of look in to get more targets. And we recently found out that the state decides to give monies to these fake abortion clinics, as we call it. It's like Birthright and any of those like pregnancy crisis centers where they lure you in. If you're pregnant, we can help. But it's all about just guilting women into not having an abortion. And they don't really care once the child is born. So there's been a campaign against stop funding with our state dollars to fund these fake abortion clinics.
Yeah, and there's way more of those in Minnesota than there are clinics that offer abortion, right? There's only 8 abortion clinics in the whole state. And do you remember? I don't remember how many of these crisis pregnancy centers there are, but there's like dozens of them at least,
Right. Mm-hmm. And I believe an abortion clinic from out of state is planning to move in within the Twin Cities, just because they can. We still legal here, where they can set up business. So that's really great that those are coming in, and definitely stop having state money fund these fake clinics, because they do just a disservice to women who are obviously in crisis, and they're just using them for their own goals in the end, and not really care about what happens when the children are born.
Yeah, so there were the first protests when the leak happened, and then when Roe versus Wade was overturned, that were the biggest ones, like 10,000, 5,000, like thousands of people. And then, so after that, there have been a series of protests that have been smaller that have been in front of some of these crisis pregnancy centers, demanding that the state cut off funding for them, because almost all of them too are operated openly. Like you go to their website, it talks about their religious mission and all this stuff. So, and then there's also been protests on campus at the University of Minnesota. Students for a Democratic Society is the main group organizing those, together with others, and pressuring the University of Minnesota administration to start providing abortion services at their clinics on the different campuses around the state. They used to, actually, up until 1974 or 76, and then they stopped for whatever reason. But that could really help with access to abortion around the state, because if you're not in the Twin Cities area, forget about it. There's almost nothing in the whole state. And there are University of Minnesota campuses around different parts of the state. So that could really help solve that problem. So I've been at some of those protests, taking pictures and stuff too. And I think we'll keep seeing more. Like all of us are in states, Minnesota and California, where abortion is still legal, but it's not always accessible for people who don't have the money or live in areas of the state where there aren't any clinics nearby and you have to travel and all of that. So that's one big issue. Why don't we move on to talk about war or wars. The conflict in Ukraine started this year. There have been a lot of protests in the Twin Cities about that. Have there been protests out in LA?
Unfortunately, it's mostly like pro-Ukraine protests that were going on, and they were pretty massive. But honestly, like a lot of people don't even know what they're supporting. Like people think that.
Like those protests were calling for more U.S. intervention, basically?
Pretty much. They were like siding with Ukraine on this issue kind of thing. A lot of people think that this war started this year, but objectively, this has been going on since at least 2014. And a lot of people forgot about that stuff that has been happening since then. Where, I don't know. It's just like people are on this whole tirade of like, oh, Putin is gonna nuke us kind of thing. I was just like, so people just go because it's a trendy thing to do. I don't know. I mean, I've been busy with work, so I never like had the chance to check it out myself. But I just see people just holding flags with the Nazi symbol on the Ukrainian flags. I'm just like, all right, okay.
Like from the Azov battalion and things like that. The far
like,
right wing militias and all that.
Right. It's really weird. Like people just like holding the flags with that symbol on it, and it's of course like people are always like calling for like U.S. sanctions, it kind of thing, without even knowing like what sanctions even do. And some people don't even care like whether it's harmful to countries when it is opposed, and it's just like okay, whatever. But yeah, that a lot of protests like that has been going on like since it started like this year, and then it doesn't happen. It's not happening like as much now, but because of like other things that are happening around the world, like with Iran and stuff. But yeah, it's mostly happening like in the west side of LA, and
That's like the richer side.
yeah, for the most part. It's sometimes in downtown, but I don't really hear about the protests. It just happens kind of thing. So usually I hear about it like a week in advance, but these type of things like just pop up, which is weird because I don't hear about it and I'm usually like on top of the things, but
Mm.
oh well.
How about you, Kim? You're involved in Women Against Military Madness, and I've been at a lot of the protests here. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, it's still even in our anti-war movement, there's still some confusion exactly what's going on. But us and along with other anti-war groups in the Twin Cities, but we talk about the U.S. not escalating war because it's, as Luis was saying, it's been going on for years. So we put out a message about no proxy war for the U.S. because it's definitely talking about that, even though a lot of people still believe that the U.S. isn't involved, but they're sending money and weapons. So obviously it means we are, or the U.S.'s government is involved. But it's clear to me and for some of the most of the folks of the anti-war movement. So I mean, it's complex, but as long as we keep putting the message out that we don't want a proxy war, the U.S. should not be in a proxy war, and Joe Biden's already sent like billions of dollars to the Ukraine to fund a war, which we say we are always against sending more money to military instead of spending it here for human needs here at our home. So, but saying that, so then we've had a good chunk of protests, either focusing on this proxy war or just noting that the U.S. has these endless wars and we want to end them, and always bringing it back that we should fund human needs and not war. And truly, the U.S. military budget is just such a high ratio from other countries that it just makes sense to stop funding wars. And a little other layers, like that's why we have a lot of refugees fleeing their country, their homeland, because no one wants to leave their homeland because they feel like it. It's a lot to do with what the U.S. is doing in other people's countries too. And that's always true and it will be true. And it's just more of us to get that message out because people still think that people coming from other countries is because they just feel like it. But it's really the underlining is the U.S. involvement in their countries.
Yeah, this year there's been definitely in Minnesota and I think around the country an influx of refugees from Ukraine and also Afghanistan, with the U.S. finally sort of withdrawal there. So that's definitely true. The immigration to the U.S. tracks directly with U.S. imperialist meddling in other countries. But how would you say like the protests that have happened here around this issue have been, like we just talked about Roe versus Wade, 5,000, 10,000 people. These protests have been smaller, right? Because there's a smaller number of people who have that sort of anti-imperialist understanding, but they've been consistent, right?
Right. Well, it's also like another kind of level that I noticed is that everyone was so concerned about the Ukraine refugees, mostly like white versus the refugees from Iraq that were being bombarded by the U.S., which they're not white. But all of a sudden we have to, the country was in an uproar to help all the refugees coming from the Ukraine. I'm like, what's the difference? Also seems like whenever the U.S. says something is good and we should go bomb them, a lot of people are confused and will back the U.S. because it's their patriotic duty. It's even hard to say those words because they just don't quite understand like the layers behind it. I mean, I get it. They want to help people, generally speaking, be humanitarian. But if the U.S. just stops invading other countries or doing proxy wars, the people would feel very fine to stay at their house and not have to leave their country. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, but
Yeah, I think about like in the punk scene in the 80s, it was really the central thing was like Reagan sucks and nuclear war is really close and we have to oppose that. Whereas now we're closer to nuclear war with Russia now than we were even in the 80s. And you get like punk albums of like, songs for Ukraine, like supporting this nuclear brinksmanship with Russia. It's just drives me nuts. But anything else on this topic, Luis, or should we move on to labor struggles?
No, I don't think I have anything else to add. Just pretty sour, like the whole refugee thing that they let the Ukrainian refugees in, but we had Haitian and Salvi Guatemalan refugees stuck at the border for God knows how long because of this the title thing that doesn't let them in because of COVID kind of thing, but they let the Ukrainian ones in, which is like the hypocrisy with the U.S. immigration system here.
Well, just to kind of dovetail off of that, the hypocrisy was on full force when there was people from Haiti trying to get into the U.S. and there was actual border police on horses with whipping the Haitians to get back. I'm like, if that wasn't such a strong message of how the U.S. treats people, I don't know what is, but that wasn't another big story that wasn't as big, but it was definitely, it hit the media for a little bit on how the Haitian refugees were being treated at the border.
Yeah, and that basic white supremacy of the immigration system goes back to its very beginning. Like among the first big immigration laws in this country was the Chinese Exclusion Act and mass deportation of Mexicans in the 30s and all of that. Yeah, so it continues to this very day, right? As we're talking, Ukraine versus Haiti, can't get any clearer. So why don't we move on to talk about labor struggles a little bit? I know here in the Twin Cities this year, the Minneapolis teachers and education and support professionals went on strike for 3 weeks in March. We can talk about that. There's also like unionization among Amazon happening this year, and then Starbucks workers all over the country. The Teamsters are gearing up for a big contract fight and might go on strike this next year. Have you seen labor struggles that you've been out at, like taking pictures this year, Luis, either strikes or protests or anything?
No, I haven't because of work. They usually happen during the day when I'm super busy. But
so you need to go on strike so you can go take pictures.
I know. But one I remember out here is that a bunch of workers from the universities went on strike. So that's been going on for at least a month from what I remember, and it's still going on. But a lot of it is going on like in West LA. Again, it's kind of like out of my range because I dread the traffic over here.
So that's at the whole University of California system through the whole state, right? So
yeah, the UC.
In LA, that would be UCLA.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's like a 40-minute drive for me. So, but there's things like that going on. Right now, UTLA, the teachers union here are fighting for smaller class sizes, pretty much better working conditions here. I don't know if they're going on strike, but they've been holding like protests and kind of like walkouts in front of their schools, fighting for these things, pretty much struggling with the new superintendent that just came in after Austin Butner, who was backed by a millionaire money. But now this guy from Florida is not really working with teachers on their demands or anything like that. So now they've been protesting at the LA Unified building in downtown this past Tuesday. But maybe it could go into a protest. I need to talk to my teacher friends about this, but they've been holding a lot of actions on that.
Has there been anything from the railroad workers out there?
Not that I heard of. But I have a homie that works in the railroads, and he hasn't really like talked to me about it as much. But around the first time when the strike was about to happen, that's when I was asking him about it. But I guess they reached an agreement at first, so the strike didn't happen, and then now they're getting fucked over again. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's a protest this Tuesday here in Minneapolis that the railroad workers are doing. So I'm going to try and go out to that and see what that's about. So their struggle is continuing, even though, the Biden administration and Congress Democratic controlled Congress imposed a deal on them that didn't include their main demand and that basically took away their right to withhold their labor. But how about here in the Twin Cities? Kim, were you out at the teacher strike at all, taking pictures?
Yeah, I was actually at some of the bigger rallies. And then one of our members, when I was a part of the Climate Justice Committee, B is a teacher. And a few of our members went out to support B there. And it was really good. They definitely really loved us being there to support not only the teachers, but B themselves. And it was really, I mean, it's fun going to these strikes because people are so hyped up and they've got a lot of solidarity. And so you get a lot of great action shots too. And the speeches are great. And I actually have a friend in Columbus, Ohio, which the teachers went on strike. It wasn't too long, but they also kind of had like the similar experiences here, is that teachers and aides and professional workers, janitors, they're all kind of kept separately. They do their separate things. They don't really intermix a lot. But the strike is a great thing because it brings everyone together and they're able to collaborate more, understand the different levels of the teachers they have there. The ESP workers were really getting screwed over. So the teachers that like fully licensed teachers, I believe. So they were really good instrumental part to help boost up other teachers that need more support there too. So I mean, it's a great collaboration. And now it really hurts the bosses because now everyone is more united together, which is actually a best thing to do when you want to win a strike and like be more powerful as like a unit. So my friend in Columbus was really excited about how their strike turned out. They definitely won. So there's definitely lessons to be learned. And when more workers go out on strike, it really influences other workers to go out on strike too. And also in the Twin Cities, we've had a Starbucks. Once they formed a union in different stores, one of them actually went out on strike. So one of our union leaders here and I went down just to support them. And they've gotten other people to come by and hang out. And some of the teachers that were on strike were also a part of being online with the Starbucks workers. And it turns out the boss is a real jerk. So we were able to get a little interview and little photo to put in Fight Back News. So if it's something small with a good picture with workers with signs, it's always good to have those pictures and a little bit of news article to send to Fight Back News and all these Twitter accounts and Facebook, because it really helps kind of spread the word. And it's really heartwarming that now there's more workers that are understanding their power, and really a lot of workers have nothing left to lose, mainly because of the effects from COVID, inflation, and working conditions. So it's a good time to be a worker that needs to go out on strike, because I believe most of them have gotten a lot of gains because they went out on strike.
Yeah, I was able to go out also to a couple times when Starbucks workers went on strike at a couple of the local stores here and get a few pictures. And yeah, it was definitely inspiring. And it was almost exactly a year ago that the first Starbucks store unionized. And it's just been in the last year that now there's thousands of Starbucks workers around the country that are unionized. So it's kind of cool how that can just change like that almost overnight, in a whole like store industry, because that's inspiring workers at other retail stores and coffee shops to want to unionize, and it's just going to spread. And then, yeah, the teacher strike here in the Twin Cities in March, I had the privilege to basically be photographing that whole strike. And so I was out there every day and on the picket lines and then at the unity rallies and stuff. And but the teacher strike was so powerful here, I think, because you really see what, we have these ideas in our head. Oh, the workers have the power to change society. You really see it, right? Where teachers in the whole city can shut down education in the whole city, and then that not only affects all the schools, there's a ripple effect, right? Then parents, who don't have to make other arrangements or stay home from work to take care of kids. And there's that power, and you just see a whole city start to, it's not that the whole city came to a standstill, but like a big part of the city did, and throughout the whole city. And it was really, really powerful. And then the workers realizing that, oh, we actually have this power it's amazing to watch, Like I know, Kim, you talked about the last time you were on the Republic Windows and Doors struggle in Chicago, where those workers did the sit-in in the factory. And yeah, a lot of times you don't even realize the power you have until you use it,
Well, the other nice, great thing about the teacher strike is that the students were also behind the teachers, and they did an occupation at the main hall where they were having negotiations. So the students they understand what the teachers are going through. So they were able to support them by doing a thorn in the administration side by occupying their space. So, and I think that definitely added a more pressure to get this settled and to get the teachers what they really deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. That slogan that was used, I think, is so powerful, that teachers' teaching conditions are students' learning conditions, because the administration and like the capitalists behind them try to divide and conquer, right? Set teachers and students against each other. And that slogan just brings it back together, that students have an interest in teachers having smaller class sizes because that's their class sizes, for example.
I mean, just like the healthcare workers, the nurses went on strike for 3 days here in the Twin Cities. I didn't get to go out and take photos, but I was really looking forward for them to going out on a longer strike that they voted on just a couple of days ago. But they got settled because they were supposed to be on strike for, I think, 3 weeks, which meant the holidays. And from what I hear, the administration would replace them with traveling nurses. And apparently over the holidays, no one really wants to work because they want to spend time with their families. So that's just kind of another example that even though they were on strike for 3 days, I think that actually build pressure for them to get a better contract. Because when you're trying to go out even longer, it becomes even more difficult to sustain someone's business. And the administration figured that out. So
yeah, totally. So why don't we move on to a couple of more fun news quotes? Well, not necessarily fun, but might be fun to talk about. Elon Musk bought Twitter. What do you think that means for people on the left, for photographers, progressive people who wants to take the first whack at Elon Musk?
I could foresee like censorship on our side. Definitely. From what I've been hearing, it's just a matter of people reporting like leftist accounts and for them to get banned and stuff like that. So that's pretty alarming. Definitely with the whole thing where there's more hate speech going on under his ownership of Twitter, where people feel more bolden to say the N-word and things like that online. So, and then there's a whole thing of Elon firing a lot of its staff at IT, things like that, which, yeah, I feel like it's like a workers' violation there, which is like CEO just firing people just without any cause. So I don't know. There was that whole thing where Twitter was falling apart because he fired like very essential people that makes Twitter function.
Yeah.
Where they put the Twitter logo onto some in funerals they put people in clouds and stuff. They put the Twitter logo on that too. So I thought that was pretty funny. But I don't know. People just have jokes for everything. That's what keeps me going. But other than that, yeah, I don't think it's gonna be like Twitter has always been changing, but in this case, it's just a matter of like us being able to engage in a way. Maybe we'll get shadow banned or something like that. But I don't know. I don't think it's gonna get any better under Elon.
Yeah, I feel like some of his first actions, it's like reinstating Trump's account, although Trump hasn't used it yet, but it's back. If he wants to, he can use it. He activated Kanye West, who immediately started posting about liking Hitler and Nazis. And so then he got rebanned. Yeah, there's just this outpouring of people on the right kind of going crazy on Twitter. And I agree. I saw the thing you're talking about where these far right, like weird chat rooms were circulating this list of accounts of people on the left to report and try and get banned and stuff. And it seems like that's the way things are going. It's this bizarro world where you have all these people on the right screaming bloody murder about like, oh, we're not treated equally on Twitter, but in fact, they're given more space to exist there than people on the left. So what's the basic lesson? Elon Musk sucks. Before it was owned by a bunch of millionaires. Now it's owned by one billionaire. They all suck. And it should be a public utility, like the phone. Like, well, I guess they privatized the phones and stuff too, but it should be, it's like, it should not be under the control of one weird ass billionaire. So let's talk a little bit about, there's some famous people who died in 2022. They say, you should not speak ill of the dead, but
but we can.
But we can if you want to about some of them. Queen Elizabeth II. Anyone want to say anything about that? Were people in the former colonies of England sad when Queen Elizabeth II died? Or people in Ireland?
Nobody was sad because she died. Well, at least in my group of friends, it was like, oh, thank God, kind of thing. Yeah, it's kind of weird when people are sad about people like that, like Queen Elizabeth. Like, why are you sad? Like, she didn't do nothing for you. I don't know. People have some type of weird attachment to people who have like this royalty or whatever. I don't know.
I mean, even the whole American Revolution, as mixed as that was in terms of slavery and genocide being part of that too, like, wasn't that the whole idea, to get rid of like kings and queens, but people still, you're right, have this bizarre fascination with it.
Yeah. And then I like the whole thing where they were protesting out there in England and then they got arrested or things like that. And it's kind of weird that they kind of push this narrative on places like North Korea where you can't protest kind of thing, or else you get like imprisoned type of thing. But the same thing is happening in England, but it's not the same type of like outrage. And then the whole thing about where it's just people like waiting in lines for days to kind of like see, I guess, the casket or something like that. And it's just like, I don't know. People, unless it's like not their country, people just like are the first ones to say like, oh, all these people are brainwashed kind of thing. But they're doing the same exact thing here, and it's just like,
yeah.
And then they still got kings and queens and things, like, grow up.
Yeah. So what about Mikhail Gorbachev died this year. He was the last leader of the Soviet Union and was the one who actually dissolved the Soviet Union, led to its downfall, so that they could have Pizza Hut and he could be in Pizza Hut commercials.
Honestly, I thought he was dead.
You thought he was already gone?
Yeah,
I know some of these people, you don't even realize they're still alive and they're just chilling, doing whatever. But these people who, yeah, he was still alive. Did he still live in Russia even? I don't even know. Or did he just he was like peaced out and he came to the West or something? I don't know. Yeah, let's see who else. Olivia Newton-John died this year as well. Any comments?
Sad because she's an endearing actress and a pop icon and activist. So when activists die, it's
was she an activist too? I didn't know that.
Well, I had to look her up because and I think it was around, I want to say, the article is like calling her an incredible activist. There was talk about her being for like gay rights. But that's what happens when I do my research before a podcast. Well, depending on what type of like actors may get a little bit more sympathy from me. I know this is really off topic, but when Prince passed away many years ago, I mean, he's a Minnesota icon and a great musician and forward thinking. But then I found out he donated money to the Trayvon Martin's family. And all the activism work around that, the Black Lives Matter issue. So when I found that out, I was really sad that he passed away, but it was many years ago. So when actors are actually really good activists, it's a loss when any activist on the correct side passes away. So.
Yeah, some other prominent actors and musicians that passed away this year. Sidney Poitier, Jean-Luc Godard, Angela Lansbury, Jerry Lee Lewis. Some of them have played a huge role in, whether it's the civil rights movement or in just breaking down barriers for Black and other oppressed peoples in their fields. Yeah. So I agree. I think that's important to note and be supportive of.
Mm-hmm. Well, that just because he's one of my favorite actors, Ed Asner, I looked him up. He died a year ago, but he was also instrumental being supported of like CISPIS and the revolutionary forces down in South Central America. So I've heard stories. So
I remember, he would often go to protests. CISPA, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, which was supportive of the revolutionary movement during the war and the Civil War in El Salvador. Yeah, he often would go to their protests and would sign, write letters, fundraising letters for them and stuff. So there are some good actors out there for sure. Yeah, so other than what we've already talked about, are there any other memorable protests you can think of that you took photos at in the last year? What are some of the most powerful protests you remember being at this year? You want to go, Luis?
I'm trying to brainstorm right now. So I'll let you go first, Kim.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, mainly I go to weekend protests. So that was a lot of anti-war protests going on. And with Ukraine. And what else? It seems like it was a slower year than past years for me being out at protests. But I know there's a lot of still like Black Lives Matters protests going on during the week, which is still pretty active. I'm like, so there's a couple of like notable police killings. Was that within this year, or was it kind of like last year? They kind of all running together.
Yeah, it was January this year that the police here in the Twin Cities killed Amir Locke, and then there was Tekle Sundberg later this year,
and then Winston, right?
Winston Smith may have been the year before, 2021 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the St. Paul police just killed a guy like within the last few days, and they're still demanding that the footage come out on that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know in LA this year, there was a big campaign that you've taken a lot of photos at, Luis, about the sheriff, Boot the Bandito, like get rid of the sheriff and trying to make steps towards community control of the police.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. It was mostly a lot of anniversary events with families that were impacted by the deputy killings. A lot of them was also a result of like the deputy gangs that we have here, like Los Banditos. That's why we wanted Villanueva out, because we believe that he's one of them too, and he doesn't do anything about the deputy gangs that are just growing within the department.
And he lost the election, right?
Yes, he did. He lost five. Thank God, because a lot of people were really all up on him, like, oh, he's gonna do something about the homeless problem kind of thing. And honestly, like, he doesn't. He takes credit for things that he never did, and all the sheriffs do is harass people who are houseless out here. They don't really do anything substantial to fix this problem. They can't. What is the police going to do? Like push them out somewhere else? That's all they do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of ridiculous that people think that they are the solution to fix this problem, and all we're going to do is like throw money at them, because that's all that they ask for. Like, oh, we want like a couple $1 million, and then the Villanueva had a vendetta against like the board supervisors, because they're kind of siding with us on pushing accountability on the department, and Villanueva didn't like that. He was pushing his own candidates to run against like one of the board members, Hilda Solis, because she's one of the people that was supporting like a charter amendment for the board of supervisors to have the power to impeach the sheriff, which that passed as well this past midterm election. So These are little victories that we have going on here locally. But even with this new sheriff that we have, he still has like a pass of his own under the leadership of in the Long Beach Police Department that we still have to check him on. Because when he was chief, there was a guy named Cesar Rodriguez who got pushed in front of a train by Long Beach police, and he didn't do anything about it. And the cops that were involved with that got promoted. So we can't even guarantee he's going to be any better than Villanueva. So we're definitely going to check him on that in the upcoming years, because Villanueva started off as I want to change the department, the culture, blah blah blah, but he ended up being like this monster that even more unimaginable than we would have thought, because even though like we we definitely want to attack him for things like that, but he succumbs to this they're attacking me because I'm Latino kind of thing. It's like, shut up, kind of thing. um Even though their deputies are killing Chicanos out here, execution style, like shooting them in the back kind of things. So like things like that don't even matter to me, at least. If you're behind these terrible executions because of your deputies, then you have no right to use that against us, especially if you're killing like Black and Chicanos out here. But this is a long struggle, and I feel like it's only going to get better. But I forgot what the question was.
Oh, just talking about the protests around police brutality over the last year out there, so it sounds like it's good that the sheriff was defeated, but the struggle continues, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And also the victory of a little bit more accountability passing in that referendum. That's pretty significant, it seems like.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because there was like absolutely nothing to hold the sheriff accountable for some of the stuff that he does. Like he avoids subpoenas kind of thing. He gets deputies to not testify on the existence of deputy gangs, and they have like a code to pretty much deny their existence, even though he said like they do exist, but they're not gangs, they're cliques kind of thing. And he goes out of his way to pretty much dox families who are trying to expose Villanueva and trying to seek justice for their family members. So that Villanueva was legitimately a danger to us and to these families and anyone that opposes him, because what was it, a couple of months ago, the sheriff raided one of the board of supervisors like in the morning, like I hear it was like very dramatic, like helicopters hovering over her house, because she was one of the ones that was an opponent against him. So he's pretty much sending, I think he calls it like a section of the department like to investigate corruption, but nah, these people are legitimately like the secret police. That
going after his political enemies.
Exactly. Pretty much investigating corruption within the system, when in fact he's the corrupt one himself. But yeah, the fact that sheriffs even have that is scary, because they may use it even more and more deliberately violently too.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we move on to talking about some memorable photography milestones for everyone in 2022, new accomplishments. Kim, do you want to talk about, you set up a table and sold some of your prints recently?
Yes. Brad had a great idea that him and I would share a table at a holiday craft and bake sale. And we invited a lot of the activist groups to our famous 4200 community center, where it houses some activists, social justice groups. And we had one like 6 years ago, and it was really successful. So thanks, Brad, for bringing that idea back. But we would gather our photographs and we would sell them, and then would donate our proceeds to wherever we would like, because we wouldn't be associated. Well, my idea was like we would just kind of do it as a separate thing. but Brad was gracious enough not to get things done when he wanted to, so I was able to have a full table. And I didn't do protest pictures mainly because I was not that I'm always picking on Brad, but I figured Brad would have more of those protest pictures and much better kind of not quality, but just kind of composition. And so I went through my photos and did more nature scenes, more a lot of nature and some kind of interesting composition or angles. So I was able to, I had a bunch of different sizes, collages and stuff. Very inexpensive craft thing to do, but I was really, I was impressed on how I was able to kind of gather things together and looking really good, and people really wanted to buy it. So I was really happy that people came over and bought some things. But it's always a challenge to figure out like what people would like to buy and not be too outrageously expensive, but something useful. So something to note, magnets went well and like note cards. So magnets were really, really great to have.
Like
and I did,
magnets with your photos on them, like
yeah,
refrigerator magnets, kind of.
yeah. So I was a little worried about that, but that seemed to go a lot quicker. Note cards are always like handy for people to, use. And then I had like 8x10s, 5x7s. Some were framed, some were not. Some were in collages. Like I like flowers that are close, or like there were some mushrooms. So mushrooms seemed to be popular also.
That's what I bought.
And I really had a cool picture of the moon. My friend and I went to go northern lights hunting. And at one point we were in a place where it was dark. The moon was lower to the horizon and big and very bright. So my camera lens and the way I was able to take the photo, it turned out to be one of the better pictures of the moon I've ever taken. It reminded me of the old school kind of book where you had that little half moon kind of hanging in darkness. So I really like interesting things. And there's a picture of a lake with algae plant life and the clouds were reflecting, and it really looked like a Monet painting when I finally blew it up. So I was really impressed. And it also helped me kind of get like another shot in the arm to kind of go forward on doing some more types of photography, or like focusing it more. So now that I've kind of got into the groove, thanks, Brad. So hopefully to do more, and then actually look through my other kind of protest pictures from like even years ago to get like more interesting things that people would want to buy.
And Luis, I got a print from you earlier this year. The one that I got, it's like a mural, I assume in Boyle Heights or East LA. Like,
Oh yeah.
and then like a beautiful like sunset sky in the background. Like, have you been doing more prints and stuff like that too?
As of lately, no. I just been hanging them around my house because I was like, all right, if people are not gonna buy them, I'll just put them around my house. But this this past Chicano moratorium that we had this past August, I decided to like fundraise for the event by selling some of my photos. And yeah, it was pretty good. I managed to raise like, I don't know, like $200 or something like that for my photos. So
That's
the
great.
fact that people bought them was pretty good. I like that people were interested that much. So it was cool. Now I'm just like wondering what other, yeah, like your thing, like what other photos that people would like to buy, because sometimes people look through a list of photos I have on my Instagram and it's like, oh, I want this. It's like, oh, okay. So I took,
Like not the
so
one
I,
you would have thought people would want necessarily.
yeah, people like a lot of my street photography, especially graffiti art kind of thing, because I guess to them it resembles like the aesthetics of LA, like there's graffiti all over the place, especially during the pandemic when everything was on lockdown, but still we have like the taggers out just like going everywhere, like in the most like random places, like high up in buildings. Like, how do you get up there? But things like that intrigue me, and sometimes they're very good. Some of them suck, but I still take photos of it because people like the city eventually paints over it and then it's gone. And then new ones come out and like something different always pops up. So that's what I like taking photos of that. And especially of murals out here in East LA, Boyle Heights, because as time goes on, they're disappearing. There aren't as many
Mhm.
as there were before, especially the old ones. Like sometimes they get tagged over, unfortunately, because that's kind of like our history here. And then eventually they don't get repainted. They get painted over or something like that. So it's important to like document things like that, and people like that in the print. So I was like, all right, cool. I usually print like protest photos. Like people like I think one that I sold in the Chicano Moratorium was like a bunch of dudes during one of our protests during the uprisings in front of the sheriff station, holding like fuck the sheriffs kind of thing. A lot of people like that. Like I sold a 8x12 version of that, and also like a little one. So I'll probably reprint that. There's other ones that I got around laying in the house, but it's still a work in progress. I don't put it as out that much. I don't know why, but I do need to like push it out, like, oh, I got these prints kind of thing. But that's something in the future too.
Yeah, I always have mixed feelings about that too. Like, I don't want to be like I'm trying to sell people things all the time, but yeah, people are interested, so it's always that balance.
Hmm.
I did want to ask you, Luis, also about your street photography, because just watching what you've been posting, it feels to me like you've like really upped your game in street photography over the last year. I don't know. What do you think? Do you feel like you're just doing it more, or like,
Yeah, I do it more, but I don't post a lot of it. I don't know why. Well, this past year is mostly like, oh, it's just like for myself kind of thing. But every so often I do take photos and then post the ones that I think that are like, all right, this is pretty cool for online kind of thing. But I think it has a lot more to do because got myself a smaller camera, and I'm able to like take photos of more things a little closer, because with like a big mirrorless camera, people are like, what the hell are you doing with that kind of thing? So
what camera did
yeah,
you get?
this one actually, the Fuji X100V. It's like pretty small, and I could just like detach like this adapter and it becomes this small thing. So
I've heard so many good things about Fuji's. What do you think so far?
I love the colors of it. With the Fuji's, it has like film simulations. And last year I took up like film photography, and I really like film because of like how it looks, and it gives like that type of nostalgic feeling to it, which I always loved, and I try to emulate with my digital photography. And I feel like with film, I was able to like edit my photos in a way that is very unrealistic kind of thing. So I learned a lot from film photography, and kind of taking photos that in my mind matter kind of thing, instead of like aimlessly like just taking photos of everything kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I learned a lot with film. Unfortunately, it's so expensive
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
buy now and develop. So with that Fuji camera, it does a job. I mean, it looks digital, but it still has that film aesthetic. You could create your own film simulations that existed. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Too bad it's so expensive now. I got it at a perfect time.
Yeah. I want to like rent one or borrow one from someone just to try it, because everyone who uses them, it's just like a religion. It's like people just are so devoted to it,
Uh-huh.
to Fuji's. But Kim, you got some new gear this year too, right? Like new lens
Uh,
or lenses?
that was last
Oh,
couple years
okay.
ago. Yep.
Okay.
It was when I was watching all the independent photographers here in the Twin Cities. So I felt like I had to upgrade my stuff. But yeah, as soon as I buy something, then I start seeing like other cameras that are like better. And I'm like, there's just no way to really, I mean, it's hard to upgrade because it's so expensive.
Yeah, it really is. I had a friend who messaged me asking about, she wanted to get a camera as a gift for somebody and asking what she could get for $400 that would be good. And I was just like, yeah, I don't think you're gonna get much, unfortunately, unless you get really lucky with something used that someone's just trying to get rid of. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's an expensive hobby. So anything that you want to talk about with music? I know we all like music and sometimes go to concerts or take pictures at concerts. Did either of you take photos at any shows this year or anything notable?
We're still in the pandemic. It's going to concerts. No, I haven't been to concerts in a long time. I did a lot more photography in my college years with the punk scene, which I know, Brad, you put together a calendar of the punk scene in DC. So that's always fun. I mean, it's action. So I haven't been to a concert, and I don't know. Well, nowadays they don't allow you to bring cameras. So unless it's like one of those underground kind of places, or not commercial establishments. So it would be fun to get back into that. That was my other kind of like lifelong dream, is to be a rock and roll photographer. So
Mm.
Yeah, in the Twin Cities, there's First Avenue, which is the famous club that,
mhm.
from the Prince movies and stuff. But they have a whole network of clubs that they own now. And so like, jokingly called the First Avenue Industrial Complex, but all of their places are pretty restrictive with cameras, like you
Mhm.
said. But a couple of them I've been able to get cameras in and take
Okay.
pictures. But then, yeah, more DIY shows. It's pretty much anything goes. Like I even went to a show in a garage like a month or two ago, just someone's garage, and it
Mhm.
was an amazing show,
Mhm.
and there was a bunch of us there taking pictures. But yeah, it's more those ones where you can bring your camera and use a flash, because even at the First Avenue ones, yeah, they do let you take pictures. If you start using a flash, they're gonna start freaking out sometimes.
Yep. Well, I mean, there is Pride. They actually open stages, and the famous Tina and the B-Sides played this past June. So I took the liberty to take some photos. So I got some really good close-up photos of Tina and her facial expressions, which I will have to post soon, or
Yeah,
maybe wait another year.
yeah. And Luis, we talked before when you were on about some shows you went to during COVID, or like, when there still weren't allowing shows, but people just did them anyways, like outdoors. Like, have there been more like
Yeah.
that, or what's going on in LA now? Have you been going to shows at all?
Not as much, but they definitely have been going on. Those bands that threw like shows in the riverbeds out here or under bridges, began, I think, gotten big from last year to now, where they started holding like exhibitions kind of thing and like warehouses type of thing, where it's like other big names in the tagging scene. Because like how we mentioned before, like the punk scene now is just a mixture of like the party scene, the taggy scene, and a bunch of things mixed into one, where it's just a completely different groups of people mixed in a bunch. And now it's just this own unique kind of thing where it's not just exclusively punk. It is punk music, but it has more aesthetics tied into it as well. So now it's just this big old thing where people just throw shows in like the most random places. I think last year I went to a show out in the mountains.
Oh,
Um People just brought generators there, and then I found out that people legitimately live there, posted tents up and stuff like that, and they just been throwing like punk shows there. Eventually they got kicked out, but that's been going on throughout the pandemic. But yeah, I haven't really gone to any of those as recently. But one of the last big ones with the same band, like Dead City, like in LA, we had the Sixth Street Bridge has been closed for like since 2016, and they barely reopened in this past summer. And before they even had the ceremony, they had a show underneath that bridge. It was a big thing. Like a good amount of bands played, and then eventually it turned into a police riot. LAPD came in with the riot gear, shooting at people with
wow.
with gas canisters, tear gas kind of thing.
So that wasn't
Uh,
just back in the Black Flag days. That still happens. Police riots at shows with the LAPD. Damn.
yeah, like I think that band is trying to like bring that 80s energy back into today, which is cool, but yeah, like with the COVID thing, it's just like you still have to be cautious kind of thing. But I guess now it's just like, well, everyone got vaccinated or whatever. So I don't even think people wear masks nowadays, even though cases are rising here again.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're still going on. But sometimes I find out pretty late. Sometimes they charge, so I'm just like, I'm not paying for this kind of thing. But yeah, I try to go whenever I try. But sometimes after work, I'm way too tired. So I'm just like,
Yeah. I've gone to quite a few shows this year actually to take pictures, but in terms of people wearing masks, like I would say the vast majority don't anymore, and a few people do. And yeah, it's people, yelling and screaming, and I'm sure releasing all kinds of particles into the air, and it's just got to be a COVID incubator, but that's just what's happening now, for better or worse. Well, for worse, but yeah. So why don't we start rounding things out here? And do you want to end with maybe each of you
Well, how
talking
about
about?
before we end with that last question,
Yeah.
Brad? So it's great that you started this podcast, and so now you interviewed a lot of people. However, do we know anything about you? And so why don't you start by telling us a little about you, who you are, where you're from, what do you live, and what got you into photography?
Oh man, you've turned the tables. That just reminded me of that scene from Office Space, not Office Space, the Office, where Dwight is interviewing Jim about there's like drug use in the office or whatever, and then Jim like turns the tables on it, and he's like, "How do you know this? You're the one on pot." Anyway, sorry, watching too many old episodes of The Office. So who am I and how I got in photography?
Yeah.
So okay, I can be interviewed, I guess. Yeah, so I guess I didn't say at the beginning when we did introductions because it's a roundtable, so I should have. But yeah, I live here in the Twin Cities as well, along with Kim, and I do a lot of activism around immigrant rights, and for 20 years up until last year in the labor movement as well. And I was active in my union until I left that job to do photography full time. And I started doing photography in high school when it was in the film days. So there was a dark room in our school, and I took a class and learned how to do stuff in the dark room and the most very basics about taking photos, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing at all. I took one class in college where there was a better dark room and a better teacher. And so I learned a little more, but still really had no idea what the hell I was doing. And that's when I was taking pictures at punk shows in DC, like Kim referenced. I created 3 different calendars this year that people can order online. One of photos from the DC punk scene in the 80s and 90s, which is sort of like a precursor to hopefully a book or, photo zine or book that I want to put together. I just need to make the time with some of those photos and some interviews with some people. So learned. So I have those photos and from back then that I was taking at shows when I really didn't know what I was doing, but I got some decent ones and some not decent ones. And then I sort of stopped taking pictures for a while and started again more when my daughter was born in 2003. That was when we got as a gift our first digital camera. And so started with one of those little, point and shoot digital cameras. And that was when I just stopped using film at that point. And my film cameras just sort of sat in the basement languishing. When I got back into photography in a real way a few years ago, I dug those cameras out and I was like, oh, I hope I can use them. The cameras are fine, but the lenses were totally filled with fungus and shit, because our basement gets real humid. And so that was a bummer. But I have done film photography a little bit more since then, just sort of getting back into it. And And I love film too, like Luis, like you were saying. I love taking photos with film, but it is so expensive. I just hate it when I have to, because I don't have a dark room now. I have to bring them in to get them developed at, somewhere that's like a photography store that's more expensive. And yeah, so I started back with digital. I started with photography around 2003, and then would bring my camera to protests and take pictures, but really sort of stopped thinking about composition or like light or anything. It was just doing snapshots really of protests for most of those years. And then as cameras and phones got better, I started just using that mostly and didn't even bring a little point and shoot. And then it was like four or so years ago when I started riding my bike a lot, and I would just be riding and see beautiful sunsets and see all the stuff around the Twin Cities. And it was like, I should bring a camera with me, And my wife had bought a camera that was a Sony, but it was like the lowest one on the Sony chain. That was the most affordable. But so I started using that, and then yeah, just got inspired by other people who had been taking photos at protests during the the occupation of the 4th precinct here after Jamar Clark was killed, and then in all the police brutality protests since then. And I started looking at those photos, by people like Chris June and Typhy, who I had on one of the episodes, 3rd, 4th, or 5th or something. I just saw them posting their photos on Facebook, and I was like, man, their photos are so much better than anything I'm taking. What am I doing wrong, And that was when I started to really take seriously, okay, I need to sort of relearn the stuff that I'd learned a tiny bit before, around composition and light and the exposure triangle and all this stuff. And actually really learned it. And I guess the rest is history.
Well, good.
More questions?
How about I know you were definitely out there. Well, you were able to retire, so that really helps time-wise getting out there more. But I know you did a big trip, MIRAC, the Immigrants' Rights Action Coalition, did a delegation to the border wall. How was that being a photographer down there?
Yeah, so in 2019, early in 2019, in April, immigrant rights activists from here in Minnesota, as well as Milwaukee and Chicago, went down to Tucson, Arizona, and basically did a delegation to the U.S.-Mexico border, both on the U.S. side and the Mexico side. And it was a really, really powerful trip, especially for those of us, who are further north and the border just seems so far away and we don't see the reality of it. It was just very, very powerful. And the group that hosted us in Tucson, does organizing in like the Chicano community there. And so it was really rooted in the struggles of the Chicano community in Tucson and then further down towards the border, and understanding, the immigration struggle and its connections to the Chicano liberation struggle within the U.S. and indigenous liberation struggles on both sides of the border, et cetera. So, of course, I brought my camera on that trip and brought it with me everywhere. And I did take a lot of pictures. I should go through those, maybe I could put something together from that, a calendar or, a zine or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was very powerful. And, I tried to influence the where we went because of like when would be good for photography. That wasn't the main reason we were there, but like there was one night that we didn't have anything scheduled. I was like, oh, can we go up on one of the mountains here, right on the edge of Tucson and, see the sunset and all that. And so we did that and it was really, really beautiful. And I think everyone enjoyed it. And it was a very intense trip. So that gave us like a few minutes of sort of something more serene and, beautiful. And I tried to get up real early in the morning at sunrise to take pictures and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And I got pictures at the border, of just the disgusting wall with the barbed wire and all that stuff. And then on the Mexico side, it's a lot more beautiful because as an act of resistance, people on the Mexico side have painted murals and, put up graffiti and little memorials to people who have been killed, trying to cross the border and stuff. And so it's very powerful on the Mexico side. And then we got to go to a shelter for women and children who were from mostly Central America or Southern Mexico, like Oaxaca and Chiapas, that were trying to request asylum in the U.S., but because of Trump administration policies, they were denied that and they were just stuck at the border. And we got to talk with them and just hear their stories. And that was just incredibly powerful. And we were we were asked to not take pictures of them because, a lot of them were fleeing from whether it's gangs or whether it was like the right-wing government in Honduras or whatever, fleeing from repression. So it wouldn't have been good for their identities to where their location was to be known. But we did get some pictures there too at the shelter. And yeah, it was very powerful. We're actually going to do another border delegation coming up this spring. And this one we're going to be, and maybe I would guess Luis knows a little more about this, but we're going to be going to Los Angeles and starting there. And then from there going down to the border of San Diego and Tijuana. So hopefully we'll get some more pictures there too.
Yeah, for sure. I plan to go too.
Oh, awesome. Well, that'll be a well-documented trip.
Right.
I saw you took pictures too when y'all went to a conference in Tijuana too, right, this year?
Yeah. This past June in TJ at the University of Tijuana, they had the Workers' Summit of the Americas, which was like a counter thing of the Summit of the Americas that was held here in LA with Biden and all that. The reason why the Workers' Summit happened because people from because Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela were not invited to the summit. So, and on top of that, people from those countries were denied entry to to the U.S. So I guess the meeting point was in TJ, and I met a lot of incredible people like labor workers and stuff from each of those countries. And it was definitely like denouncing like the sanctions on that the U.S. imposes on all these countries. Like releasing like political prisoners like Alex Saab. Let's see. Yeah, so the conference was it was like a 3-day thing, I think, from what I remember. And then eventually we held like a protest at a Friendship Park right there. Where there's like a couple of us speakers and like left organizations from Mexico too. I forgot their names, but it was like a good presence of them there. But yeah, it was definitely like an extraordinary experience, like meeting people from around the world. Like I met somebody from Haiti. Like I did a video of them, but I was never able to find somebody that was able to translate what he was saying. I think he was speaking like, what was it, Creole or something like that. Because he wanted to like broadcast it in the news out in there in Haiti. So I did a recording for him, sent it to him. He loved it. So yeah, definitely like it's meeting like all kinds of people. I did a little bit of street photography around there, but it was just like from where I was walking around kind of thing. So I wasn't able to like see everything, but it's definitely like a site out there. But yeah.
I forgot to even bring up, I can't believe it too, that you went to Nicaragua this year and did a delegation there and brought your camera. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you got some amazing photos there.
Yeah, that in itself is an experience because wow, like right off the bat, everything is just covered in nature. So everything was beautiful there. The delegation was to pretty much to learn like how Nicaragua is trying to be a more food sovereignty kind of thing. Pretty much growing their own food, eliminating chemical uses in their crops kind of thing, and pretty much learning about the Sandinista government, like their role in helping the campesinos kind of thing. And I learned how the majority of Nicaraguans own their own land so they could grow their own food. And pretty much everyone has like their own little businesses where they sell food, and they have like their own like tiendas kind of thing, like their own stores. And they're constantly building their infrastructure in Nicaragua where things are constantly changing for the better. Like a lot of it was just they didn't really have like roads yet. Now they're constantly building that, and whatever was destroyed in the earthquake, and I guess they had an earthquake during the 80s or something, and there was I guess a pier that was completely dismantled because of that. Completely built like really nice. It was like amazing to see, like especially during the night. Like there was like a lighthouse. Yeah, that was in Managua, and then they took us to I guess where the Somoza family used to live, where he got the Sandinistas executed kind of thing, like in a mountain. Now that's being used, I guess, like a tourist attraction type of thing. Yeah, it was just overall amazing. And then we got taken out in the mountains, where it was like these schools where they teach like students from around like Latin America. So I met like students from like El Salvador, from the Dominican Republic, learning about like this agricultural like biodiversity type of thing, like program, to kind of like, I guess, spread it like wherever they're living too. But yeah, overall it was like an amazing experience. I can't wait to go back actually. In Mexico too, for this type of like with the border delegation. And yeah, I do want to do more like street photography of like different countries. I wanted to go to Venezuela, but my work didn't allow me like those vacation times, unfortunately. But hopefully again in the future.
That's a bummer. Yeah, definitely. Kim, did you have more questions?
Just one more. During the uprising when George Floyd was murdered, I know you were out there a lot. So what was that experience like as a photographer, as an activist, as a person who lives in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, it was one of the most impactful experiences of my life, I would say. One of the best experiences of my life for sure. Just being out there, most of those nights and being out there the night, especially when the third precinct of the Minneapolis Police Department was burned down, that's just not something you see every day. So seeing that was like, okay, this is incredible. And I did have my camera out there. I got pictures that night, and a lot of those are not going to see the light of day just because it has identities of people who were at something that the police declared an illegal gathering, and where the police and the FBI were going through every image online they could find and every video to try to identify people to bring charges against them. But I did share, like you referred to before, some that I blurred faces and identifying marks and stuff. Yeah, that was really, really incredible, because you could just feel it. It was the working class, mostly BIPOC folks, but a lot of white folks out there too. Minneapolis and St. Paul are still majority white. You had a very multiracial mix in the streets, but definitely led by Black youth responding to the murder of George Floyd. And, just night after night at the precinct. And then after the third precinct was burned down, people sort of migrated further down west down Lake Street towards the fifth precinct, which is at Nicollet and 31st. And I was out there when it got very close, man. It was really, really close. Like people were getting closer and closer to try to, I would assume, do something similar to what happened to the third precinct. But by that time, the police had sort of regrouped, and the National Guard was called in that day, and they were able to push protesters back. But, I was there with my camera, and, as people were, putting huge, like, from construction sites, like massive objects in the street to sort of push forward behind these barricades. And it was wild, it was very, very intense. And that's just the few nights when things were the most intense. But there was also sort of a burst of energy that burst out from that in a million different directions for the next year to even the present, really. But for the next year, there was at least one protest almost every day, and sometimes multiple things going on. And, the groups like Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar were very focused in their protests against, like, the county attorney, trying to, focus in on him to bring charges to convict the killer cops. And then there were other groups that popped up out of nowhere that were like, who the heck is that? And most of those have disappeared, but it was just this explosion of energy that was united in understanding there needed to be radical change, and that the system can't be allowed to keep operating like it has been. Yeah, documenting all of that is definitely one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And at some point I'll do something with those photos, hopefully.
Yep, great street art during that time. And just like a week later, I watched people wash a lot of that stuff off of buildings. But there was a woman who actually saved some of the billboards that were used to block or protect the windows when they got taken down. A lot of them were saved. So that's good because that's just like an historical event on top of it.
Yeah.
So,
And I made a point to go around and try and get pictures of as many of those as possible while they were up. So I did get pictures of that. But yeah, you're right. That was really important. Really good that somebody did that and made that a priority to save all of that, because that's the evidence of the uprising, you know, and how broad it was. You know, it wasn't just, you know, there's these kind of narratives that have popped up from liberals, you know, mainstream liberals, and you know, where they try and blame everything on, you know, right-wing outside agitators, or like, you know, the umbrella man who broke the windows at the Auto Max or whatever, that auto store.
AutoZone.
Yeah. And it's like, sure, there was a few weirdos that were out there, but it was I was there most night. It was overwhelmingly like young people from the neighborhood and from around the Twin Cities, overwhelmingly. And that's what it was. It was an uprising of the most oppressed young people in the Twin Cities. And it, you know, not that there weren't contradictions, there were, you know, because a lot of stuff was burned up and down Lake Street, and those are mostly immigrant-owned small businesses, and you know, so there was contradictions with that to work through, and that still need working through. But similar to I remember like when the Rodney King uprising happened in LA, you had that kind of dynamic with Korean-owned businesses and Black communities, you know, getting targeted and stuff. And that's just always going to be, you know, capitalism creates these divisions, right? And it shows up at those times. But it was powerful. You know, at the same time, you had some forces like in the Latino community that were, for example, denouncing what was happening because some, you know, immigrant-owned businesses were burned. You also had like at George Floyd Square, there was like a Mexican-owned taco restaurant that was there like around the clock giving out free food. And, you know, there were people were there with the Mexican flag, you know, that were part of it, you know, so it's not as clean as like some of the mainstream liberals like to say that it was, you know, it was actually a very multiracial and multinational uprising.
All right.
Well, thanks for turning the tables there. I guess you made it into a real round table. You know, I wasn't ready for that, but hey, I can just talk anytime. So we've been going for a while now. I really appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we just wrap up with, you know, what are your plans, if you have any, for 2023, or dreams of what you want to do with photography in the coming year?
Well, one plan that has been floating around, I hope to make a Zine of some of my photos with a strong political messaging. I think I want to call it like Capitalism and Decay or something like that, to kind of like catch people's attention. Hopefully soon I'd like to do like an exhibition of myself. Let's see. Hopefully I travel more, probably in other states or other parts of California. Just doing street photography or things like that. With events, we always do our annual events like May Day, the Chicano Moratorium, some of the age anniversaries out here in LA. But who knows? Sometimes things will escalate more. We got like new people in office here in LA. Like we got Karen Bass and things like that. Lately, activists out here have been getting into like direct confrontations with politicians, like getting in their faces type of thing. I like that. I feel like that needs to happen more, because if they don't listen to their constituents, then they need to be heard from, for sure. That's in my opinion, especially because they're selling our neighborhoods to big real estaters, to gentrification, things like that. So they're definitely going to hear from us. I imagine things will get into that side. I mean, we got into it with Villanueva, where we're directly like calling him out, like in his own little events. So we'll see. I look forward to like what will happen in the future.
How about you, Kim?
Well, my dream is always to be more into photography, but with the craft sale, that just kind of helped hopefully jumpstart me again. And now that I have photos I can actually put on Instagram to start my account even more. And also, you know, I was thinking like getting better lenses, or a telephoto lens that can definitely reach out more, because I really like the moon, the stars, kind of taking photos. And now that a friend and I went to Northern Lights hunting, it would be really fun to get the Northern Lights again. And actually better photos, better in focus photos. You know, it's always a dream too to be exhibiting some of my photos too. So perhaps now that I've actually started getting them prepared, I'll maybe reach out more to like coffee shops or something, or be more out there with my photography.
Awesome.
Yeah, mainly to, get better at it, learn. I do know the mechanics, but I forget because I haven't used it in a long time, but just to kind of get more involved. And actually, maybe one of my other goals is to get like the lighthouse applications, Lightrooms, to kind of even have my prints look even better than just my kind of basic stuff I have on my computer. And you, Brett?
Sounds awesome. Yeah, I was thinking I should figure out something to say too. I haven't had my like end of the year, like, what am I going to do next year conversation with myself. But the things that I definitely want to do, like we already talked about, I'll be going on this delegation to the US-Mexico border. Have my camera there. So I want to get as good photos as I can from that. And I want to finish my 100 Strangers project that I started like 3 years ago. And then because of COVID, I wasn't out much. And so, yeah, I want to finish that. I want to finish either like a photo zine or book about, like I said, of my DC punk scene photos from back in the day. And yeah, that's some pretty good goals, I guess. And I just counted the number of protests that I took photos at this year, and it's now 101 for the year. That includes the 3 weeks of the MFT, the teacher strike, which by itself was like 41 different like events and picket lines, and then 60 other ones. So I guess I'll make a goal too of doing at least that many next year too. So hopefully there's a lot of movements and protests that are in the streets that I can be at.
I'm sure there will be, especially with like the decay of capitalism and the downfall of imperialism. I'm sure there's going to be lots of protests that are the correct line and a lot of contradictory kind of protests, I'm sure. So it'll be interesting, especially if is Trump going to try to run again? I mean, that would be
apparently so.
Sadly interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, lots of conflict yet to come. So why don't we wrap up with just having each of you let people know where they can find you and your photography online.
You can find me on Instagram, Prolaroid, PROLEROID. That's where I post all my stuff. But yeah, you can find me there mostly. I'm on Instagram, soon to have even more photos under Kim. I spell it KIMDEF 65, and by my name on Facebook. I do have a Twitter account, but I don't really do Twitter, so I'll stick with these two. And maybe if I get really inspired, I'll do a website.
All right. Thanks again. And I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation.
Oh, yeah, anytime. Sure.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks.
A rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but the beauty a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this.
You can support Red Lens Podcast by supporting my Patreon. Go to patreon.com/SiegelPhotos, SIGALPHOTOS, and sign up for a small monthly donation. That will go a long way in helping sustain the podcast and my work as a political photographer. Thank you for checking out and supporting Red Lens Podcast.